Welcome, everyone, to the PFF Fantasy Podcast. I am one of your hosts, Jon Macri, fantasy analyst here at PFF. And as always, I am joined by PFF's lead fantasy analyst, the great Nathan Jahnke. Nate, how's it going?
Going well. Happy to be getting to the end of June, and we can finally get to July, where training camps will start to happen, and we'll get ever so closer to the preseason and ever closer to actual football games happening.
Yeah, it's exciting. We're what, less than 10 weeks now, I guess. It was 10 weeks yesterday.
That sounds right, yeah.
Yeah, so that's we're getting close. I mean, that leaves us a pretty decent chunk of time still, but at least there's going to be some exciting stuff, hopefully, to happen within these next 10 weeks or so, including the preseason, training camp, and all of that fun stuff. And that's kind of what we're focusing on today as well, right? We're taking a look at some of the updated ADP risers and fallers over the past month or so. I know we did this last time. It was a fun episode. It was our first episode just about over a month ago, I guess now. So we covered some of the kind of bigger risers and fallers post NFL draft. So now that the dust has settled a little bit, we get to kind of jump back in and potentially see if some of that rookie hype has died down and see market reactions to the other goings on across the league and evaluate where we're at before the preseason activities really kick off. So looking forward to this one for sure, as we got a few interesting names on the list to talk about today. But before we kick things off for this episode, I do want to mention that this episode is brought to you by our presenting sponsor, Fabric by Gerber Life. As a parent, your top priority is always your children's well-being. You want to give them everything they need to grow and thrive both now and in the future. With term life insurance from Fabric by Gerber Life, help protect your family so their future is secure no matter what happens. Fabric was designed by parents for parents to help you get a surprisingly affordable term life insurance policy quickly, often in less than 10 minutes. Life insurance can have a bad rap for being complicated, but Fabric makes it easy to apply with its seamless digital experience. It's all online and on your own time. And if you need the extra support, you can access a team of licensed agents who can answer questions along the way. Take steps to help protect your family today with Fabric by Gerber Life. Take the 60-second quiz to find out if term life insurance is right for you and apply today in just 10 minutes at meetfabric.com/PFF. That's meetfabric.com/PFF, meetfabric.com/PFF. Policies issued by Western Southern Life Assurance Company and distributed by Gerber Life Agency, LLC, using Fabric Technologies, not available in certain states. Price is subject to underwriting and health questions. For more information, visit us at meetfabric.com/PFF. All right, let's get things started with one of the bigger pieces of off-season news, a topic that we've touched on a few times already on the podcast prior to this one, and that is the release of Dalvin Cook from the Minnesota Vikings. We've touched on the Vikings running backs a bit and potential landing spots for Cook, but now we kind of get a chance to see the market's reaction to the situation and how that has affected his ADP and those related to him. And I don't mean his brother James necessarily, but just those the shockwaves of his release have touched essentially. So Dalvin Cook released on June 10th. So let's start with those he left behind in Minnesota. The obvious winner from this has been Alexander Mattison, who has risen from RB26 to RB19, sitting there near the end of the 5th round on Underdog. Nate, how are you feeling about Mattison as the RB19? Is this good, bad, just right for his potential this season as the Vikings' new lead back?
It's feeling good at this point, and I think he could rise even higher. I was initially concerned that Minnesota could add a veteran running back, but that hasn't been a priority to this point. So I think the longer we wait for them to potentially sign a veteran, the more seems like them adding a veteran would be more a problem for the backup running backs more so than Mattison. But I think we're probably undervaluing Mattison's situation a little bit at this point. Over the past 3 years, plenty of his great stats are if you look at him per start, but he was still one of the best running backs at avoiding tackles over the past 3 years, avoids basically 1 every 4 carries, which is 4th best among running backs over the past 3 years. But then if you look at his per start stats, fourth best in PPR points at 20, top 10 in a bunch of rushing categories, rushing yards per start, rushing yards after contact per start, runs avoiding losses, runs at 15 plus yards, both of those in the top 5. And not only that, but he does well in some of the receiving stats as well. Part of that's due to catching a couple of touchdowns in his starts, but third most receiving fantasy points per start over the past 3 years. I have him just up to RB 18, but there's a chance that could go even a little bit higher just because you expect him to see so much volume in Minnesota. And he's been basically an average to an above average running back so far. So when you have a quality player seeing that much opportunities, that's exactly what you want to see for fantasy.
Nice. Yeah, I love that. I mean, and you look at the competition around him as well. It's not substantial. It's not like the Dalvin Cook versus Alexander Mattison, like you laid out. Alexander Mattison has been very good, very efficient with his touches. We don't really know what some of these other guys are. And speaking of which, Ty Chandler, who is the other riser next to Mattison, he was, a guy drafted in the 5th round last year out of North Carolina. We didn't see him much as a rookie. He played in week 18 and carried the ball 6 times for 20 yards. But he's up 19 picks. So basically going from RB 65 to RB 60. Coming out of college, this is a guy that earned an 89.4 career rushing grade, but he ran a 4.38 40. He appears to be the favorite for now to be RB2 on the Vikings depth chart. Any interest in Ty Chandler at all as a handcuff or for any other reason in Minnesota?
I definitely moved him up my rankings after Dalvin Cook was cut, but I'm not all that high on him. I probably wouldn't be getting him at RB 60 just because I definitely anticipate if something were to happen to Alexander Mattison, I'd expect the veteran to end up in Minnesota and potentially be the starter at that point. So while I expect Chandler to see some playing time throughout the season, it's not enough for you to want to play him in fantasy. And if something happens to Mattison, I definitely expect at least one veteran to be there. And from there, it's just how much playing time does the veteran get versus Chandler. So because of that, like we saw the situation in Baltimore when multiple players got hurt. We saw Denver add running backs throughout the season last season. And like when I do my running back handcuff tiers, I have that bottom tier where it's, yeah, this guy is penciled in as the backup, but I wouldn't be surprised if they bring in someone else. And I feel like that list is going to be getting larger and larger just with the number of decent running backs that are available in free agency right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the profile isn't necessarily strong enough to be confident about him stepping into that RB1 role if something were to happen to Mattison. I will say there is a player, it's not like a guarantee that, Ty Chandler is the RB2 as well heading into the season. There was somebody, Dwayne McBride is somebody that's a personal favorite of mine, at least since around draft time. He doesn't necessarily, have much of a receiving profile or anything like that, but the rushing production and you look at the stable metrics for him coming out of UAB are definitely intriguing, at least as somebody that if the running back market does dry up or they don't sign somebody or he can beat out Ty Chandler, he could be of interest in deeper leagues. This is a guy that had a 97.5 career rushing grade in college, which was tied for first in this class with Bijan Robinson. He had 4.9 yards after contact per attempt, which was first in the class, 0.26 missed tackles forced per attempt, which was third in the class, and a 19.6% explosive run rate, which is fourth in the class. So some good numbers there. The problem obviously being that he was a 7th round pick, which apparently had more to do with some off-field concerns for him. So, there's potential that he could earn his way up the depth chart, at least ahead of Ty Chandler. You look at Chandler, 5th round sophomore with just 6 NFL carries to his name isn't exactly bulletproof in comparison to that 7th round draft capital either. So if you want to take a shot in those deeper leagues to get a piece of this backfield, I'm more than happy spending maybe a late round pick in those types of leagues on McBride right now and hoping he could show something in camp. But like you said, it's not an ideal situation. There more than likely the potential is that they would bring somebody else in should something happen to Mattison, but just someone to keep in mind there.
Yeah. And then if we go to the flip side of that, looking at ADP fallers, of course, Dalvin Cook falls for no longer being the lead back in Minnesota, fell 11 picks, was RB21 before, now is RB25. I personally don't think that's low enough for him. I moved him outside of my top 30 running backs just because we don't know how good of a situation he'll end up being in. One of those situations that a lot of us kind of expect him to potentially be in is going to the Miami Dolphins. If you look at a bunch of the other running back fallers over the past month, a lot of them are from Miami. Jeff Wilson leads the list, down 19 picks. Raheem Mostert down 17. Devin Achane down 9 picks. So that's 3 of the top 6 fallers, along with Cook making 4 of the top 6. So a lot of us have kind of expected him to end up in Miami. There was just a report on the 28th from Barry Jackson saying that Cook has been offered a contract with the Dolphins, hasn't accepted it to this point. And it sort of feels like if he wanted to go to the Dolphins, or if the Dolphins were giving him an offer that Cook was happy with, he would have accepted it by now. So while we kind of expect him to maybe go to Miami, there's also a chance that that doesn't work out.
Yeah, for sure. And then you look at, how the market has kind of reacted to the Dalvin Cook rumors to Miami. It's pushed these guys down the board. I know, Devon Achane, the 3rd-round rookie, has kind of been a favorite for people this offseason amongst that backfield. And I mean, I get it. He's an explosive runner, really good career rushing grade as well, high 4.3 speed, strong receiving profile as well. The problem with him, he was under 190 pounds. So there's concerns about him being a potential workhorse back, potentially holding back. So you add in the Dalvin Cook rumors there, it makes sense that somebody like that would fall a little bit. But any interest in these guys at all now that their price is kind of falling a little bit, and the potential that, Dalvin Cook may, like you said, sign somewhere else, like maybe the New York Jets, another rumored team. Does anybody in Miami, kind of catch your eye at where they're going right now? So maybe Achane specifically at RB 39, he has that kind of breakaway speed and maybe a potential good best ball target.
Yeah, like Achane, I think just being the rookie that has that high potential. Yeah, you mentioned the workload concerns, but it's someone worth taking a risk on. But I think both Mostert and Wilson at their ADP are probably fine at this point, going back, and especially in best ball leagues. But Miami last year was kind of a bit of a headache to predict what they would do, since at first it seemed like Chase Edmonds would be the guy. Then Mostert started seeing a lot of playing time, started having a role in the pass game, unlike what he's ever seen before. Then once Wilson gets there, he starts being more of the guy, and then Mostert started to take things back over later in the season. So it was kind of up and down for everyone. So they did have some good games between them, both multiple top 10 finishes. So there's definitely a chance that, especially if Cook doesn't show up, that Mostert or Wilson could have a couple of big games throughout the season. It's just really hard to know when it would happen. So definitely guys I'm probably more interested in best ball than I would be in redraft.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. And like we said, the other rumored team for Cook, it's another one of those AFC East teams, the New York Jets. I mean, in this case, assuming Breece Hall is healthy, would Cook be considered a clear-cut RB1 in that situation? I have a hard time seeing it. Maybe we'll see a situation that's closer to an even split in that case, or given how great Breece Hall was last year, is Cook just a straight up backup in New York behind Breece Hall? What do you think if he potentially lands in New York?
I think a lot of it would have to do with the injury to Breece Hall and how well he's recovering to it. I know earlier this week, Tyler Conklin on Good Morning Football was saying there's definitely enough room for all of the running backs there, and adding Cook, but Cook and Conklin are former teammates in Minnesota. So it's not too surprising that he'd be advocating for his former teammate. So I think it would be a situation where if he signs, then I'd probably be more concerned about Hall, because I'd be concerned about his injury and how quickly he can recover and that kind of stuff. But I think this might be a case where it's more Cook wants to play for the Jets than the Jets necessarily wanting Cook, since I think he probably would have been there by now again if that was the case. So at this point, I wouldn't be surprised if it's just wait for an injury to happen, and then a team would be a lot more desperate to add Cook.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that makes sense. And I think, again, if it's the Jets, it again makes sense why his Dalvin Cook's ADP would fall, and probably would have to do more with Breece Hall's potential recovery. They may not feel as confident in him being ready to carry that workload as the RB1 there. So that would be kind of an indicator there if we do see Dalvin Cook sign with the Jets. But Let's move on to another running back situation. This one in Cleveland, and kick it off talking about one of the best running backs in the NFL, Nick Chubb, who already sits as RB5 in Underdog's ADP. And according to Mary Kay Cabot of Cleveland.com, Chubb will be used more as a receiver out of the backfield, so his touches might evolve. She also acknowledged that he's a big part of the offense and will still be a focus in the run game, of course. So obviously, with Kareem Hunt and even Dearness Johnson out of the picture, there's absolutely room for more work in the passing game for Chubb, who often ceded the majority of that work to Hunt these past 4 seasons. We know Chubb last year played all 17 games, but he ranked 35th in targets at the running back position last season, which is 33. So Chubb also had 2 RB1 PPR finishes in 2022. Both times he had 3 or more receptions in those games, which only happened 5 times total this past season through those 17 games. So obviously an increase in targets, receptions, especially in PPR leagues, is only going to boost his potential for more of those weekly top 5 finishes on top of his high-end rushing ability. Nate, this seeming confirmation that Chubb is going to be utilized more in the passing game, does that move him up your ranks at all, or is this something that we already kind of assumed and built into his projections already this offseason? Because at RB5, according to ADP, it might be tough to find the room to move him even higher than that.
Yeah, I think he's starting to move up a little bit for me, especially potentially over some of the wide receivers, just because, like, any way you look at it in the run game, he's been arguably the best running back over the past decade. Number one in a ton of stats in that time: rushing yards per game, avoided tackles per game, yards per attempt, fantasy points per attempt in the run game, runs above 30 yards, 20 yards, whatever threshold you want to set it at. That's decently high. Chubb's been the best at getting those big carries. It's been the receiving game that's been holding him back in fantasy throughout his career. And it's especially been true under Kevin Stefanski. He's averaged 1 receiving touchdown per season, less than 300 yards every year of his career. And I was trying to see if it's just he's a not great receiver or if they aren't targeting him enough. And he has the lowest target share among running backs with at least 500 targets over the past 3 years at 12.7%. So I think a lot of it has more to do with the offense just not targeting him in the pass game, even when he is on the field. So while we expect him to see more snaps in the pass game, I think we will hopefully see more targets. If you've been on Twitter at all today on Thursday, you've been seeing discussions about the value of targets versus carries for running backs and how much better targets are for fantasy purposes, especially in PPR leagues. So even if he sees fewer carries and sees more targets, that's excellent for him in terms of his fantasy value. And I think the big thing that is probably also pushing his ADP is that some of the other running backs that you're picking in the same area, guys like Saquon Barkley, Josh Jacobs, both of them, there's talks of them holding out, maybe not playing the start of the season since both players are on the franchise tag, want longer term contracts, and it's looking less and less likely that they will get long-term contracts. So the potential of those players missing games just pushes Chubb even up higher than where he is now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it makes sense. And, when I was looking into it a little bit, one interesting thing that did kind of stand out, just looking at the Browns splits last season, like with and without Deshaun Watson, they ranked 11th in the NFL in positive EPA per play rates without Deshaun Watson. And in that span, Nick Chubb ranked as the PPR RB4. But then with Watson in the lineup, and we know he was bad last year and kind of shaking off significant rust, but the team did drop 11 spots to 22nd in the NFL in positive EPA per play rate. And Nick Chubb dropped to RB15, and that's including his overall RB1 finish in week 18. If you do take that out, because not many leagues are playing in week 18, then he was RB27 over that span. So not to cast like a ton of doubt or anything on Nick Chubb, because I do still really like him this year. But it's also because I expect this Browns offense and Watson specifically to improve from what they were last year with him at quarterback. But if they don't, then it could end up potentially bringing down Chubb a little bit, which we did see last year. Maybe not as low as that stretch last season, because Kareem Hunt was also in the lineup then, but he also did have a lower snap rate with Watson at quarterback as well. Kareem Hunt, that was. So I do feel like with the RB5 ADP, I think that makes sense for Nick Chubb. I think that's about right for him. I think most people were in on this potential already, but perhaps someone that the market is just starting to come around to now is Nick Chubb's teammate in the backfield, a player who, much like previously mentioned Ty Chandler, also a sophomore 5th-round pick with very limited NFL experience, and that's Jerome Ford. So Nick Chubb's backup, Jerome Ford, being the second biggest riser at running back. He's up 19 picks, going from RB55 to RB50. And most of that change did happen earlier this month. He's kind of stabilized in the past week or so for ADP purposes. And then, a quote from running back coach Stump Mitchell said he's capable of doing anything and everything, specifically mentioned his pass protection, which he didn't really do in college, and has apparently taken big steps there. So another guy, maybe didn't have the receiving profile in college or anything like that. He feels more like a Nick Chubb than a Kareem Hunt if we're going to compare the two. But any interest in Jerome Ford as a backup to Nick Chubb in Cleveland?
Feel pretty similarly about it, where I think if something were to happen to Chubb, I would expect the Browns to sign a veteran running back. And Ford's someone that it's just hard to know too much about him. I was looking back at our draft guide on what we were saying about him, and he was basically a project running back, which is exactly what it sounded. And it's a lot of times if a rookie doesn't see many snaps in their rookie season, that's probably not a great sign, but it's kind of hard for me to get mad at him for what he did last year, because they had Nick Chubb, they had Kareem Hunt, Dearness Johnson was third on the depth chart. He did some great things 2 years ago, and now he's also left in free agency. So Ford isn't just moving up one spot, but moving up 2 spots on the depth chart. So he's basically just a big unknown. But again, they could sign a veteran running back sometime during training camp as well to compete for that number 2 spot. So he's someone that I'm probably not too high on drafting him, especially at his ADP, but there's certainly a chance that he could do something this year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's interesting in the sense that I guess maybe there's like a 30% carry rate for him amongst the running backs there, with obviously Nick Chubb handling the large majority of the load there. But yeah, like you said, if there was something that happened to Chubb, there's guys like Leonard Fournette, Ezekiel Elliott that are still out there, could potentially come in as well. So it's hard to get too excited about Jerome Ford, but again, deeper leagues or a potential handcuff for now. He RB50, I guess it is, makes sense for where he's going. So let's head to Los Angeles, where there was some news last week of the team bringing back Sony Michel, who was with the team in 2021, where he carried the ball over 200 times. He led the team in carries by the end of the year. Wasn't necessarily a great fantasy asset over there that season. He had a few weeks down the stretch where he replaced Darrell Henderson, but that was about it. Last year, he spent most of the season with the Chargers. He was released in season there. He was released by the Dolphins even prior to that during the preseason. We saw his rushing grade reach a career low, 64.6 last year, and his yards per carry also career low, 2.9. So pretty much across the board, he kind of fell off. But with that being said, probably not in love with Michel this year and drafting him all that much. But Nate, any concern for Cam Akers' potential breakout season here in 2023?
I'm not too concerned about Michel or taking anything away from Akers. Akers has been one of the best big play running backs, averaging a 30-yard run on 0.172% of games. So that's 7th best for running backs over the past year. So he was making some big plays, was top 10 and rushing fantasy points per start last season. Since he wasn't starting all that much, he had that week 1 where he basically was barely on the field and then slowly got back on the field, then got injured, then got back and recovered. He had 3 100-yard games, but they were week 16, 17, 18. So he ended the season very well. It was just everything that came before that. But even if he's able to do great things in the run game, he hasn't been much of a receiver throughout his career. So I think that kind of caps Akers' upsize. I think with the situation with the Rams, it's probably more a problem for the backup running backs. We saw Zach Evans was the 5th biggest ADP faller, fell 10 spots from RB62 to RB72, which is basically the point where you're not getting drafted anymore in best ball. So I think the big thing for me is if Akers gets injured, I'd be a lot more confident in Sony Michel being the guy with the Rams compared to some other situations where if a starting running back got injured, you only have to go back to the playoffs in 2021, which was like 18 months ago, where Michelle took 89 snaps in the playoffs compared to 159 by Akers. So it wasn't all that long ago that he was having a significant role in this Rams offense. So I think the Rams offense trust him, even if some of the other teams that he tried to go to in the past year did not trust him as much. So I think if something were to happen to Akers, then Michelle would be someone that would potentially be a fantasy starter in that situation. So probably more happy to pick him as a handcuff, but this didn't really impact Akers in my rankings, and it really wasn't impacting his ADP at all either. So I don't think too many people are thinking that this is too big a bad news for Akers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm not concerned about it. I really like Cam Akers this season. I know a lot of people are, kind of off of Cam Akers. They're worried about, concerns of injury and things like that. But I do think it could be a really good year for him. He did look a lot better down the stretch, which was encouraging because when he came back from that Achilles injury, he didn't look as good. So he does look at least to be fully healthy now, which is a positive thing. And Sony Michel, like you said, he has that familiarity there in Los Angeles and Sean McVay's offense. So he could potentially kind of step in if there is something that happens with Akers. And, this Rams team, I don't think we're expecting them to be a playoff contender, even though they did just win the Super Bowl 2 years ago. They've kind of, sent off a lot of their key assets, especially on defense, that is. But I'd be surprised if they were pushing for a playoff spot. So them signing somebody like an Ezekiel Elliott or a Leonard Fournette that would step in some of these other situations, like we had mentioned earlier, probably doesn't make a lot of sense for the Rams. So Sony Michel could be the guy to kind of step in as the next man up if something were to happen to Cam Akers, which could be interesting. So before we keep going, we do have another sponsor we'd like to shout out, and that is DraftKings. The player you benched in fantasy football just went off. With Best Ball on DraftKings, you get the best of your team all season long. This year, Best Ball on DraftKings is bigger and better than ever with $10 million in guaranteed cash prizes up for grabs. Join DraftKings' biggest Best Ball contest today and get your first entry back in DraftKings dollars as soon as the draft is finished. Enter DraftKings Best Ball Millionaire Contest and snake draft your team for the season. Each week, you'll automatically rack up points from all your top scorers, no ads, drops, or trades. Teams with the most points by the end of the season will have a shot to take home the $1 million top prize. Head to the DraftKings app and sign up with code PFF. Join the DraftKings $10 million Best Ball tournament and then get your first entry back in DraftKings dollars. That's code PFF only on DraftKings. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER, one per customer, opt-in required with $10 entry fee. Bonus issued as 10 DraftKings dollars. Age and eligibility restrictions apply. Void where prohibited. See DraftKings.com/promotions for details. All right. We got some new news here as this one just happened on Wednesday of this week, but Davante Parker and the New England Patriots have agreed to terms on a 3-year deal worth up to $33 million with $14 million in guarantees and per game roster bonuses, according to NFL Network insider Ian Rappaport. Parker was headed into the final season of his current deal, which would have seen him earn a $5.7 million base salary. Now, per Rappaport, he's on the books for a new 3-year contract with 2-year extension. This could ensure Davante Parker as a starter, potentially clear some cap space. Patriots potentially also a favorite for DeAndre Hopkins. We know that they lost Jacoby Myers and Nelson Aguilar in free agency. They brought in Juju Smith-Schuster. There was Kendrick Bourne and Tyquan Thornton, who could potentially have seen significant roles if Hopkins isn't signed, but could also be a lot of 2 tight end sets with Hunter Henry and Mike Gesicki. This was something we talked about last week, discussing potential scheme changes, which if you haven't listened to that, definitely go back and check it out. But back to Thornton, he had been the third biggest riser for the wide receivers, up 22 spots, going from wide receiver 81 to 71. Nate, would you be surprised at all with Tyquan Thornton potentially falling after this news now that they've brought in Davante Parker, or extended Davante Parker, that is?
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if we see Thornton fall and maybe Parker rise a little bit, just since I know some people were kind of expecting Thornton to become a starter. And even if they add Hopkins, potentially take Parker's place, Parker could have been seen as a cap casualty just because he didn't have any guarantees left at this point. I think even though it's a 3-year contract, it's probably going to be set up in a way that this assures Parker that starting job this year, but gives them some flexibility in the future. But Thornton, someone who only had one game over 40 yards last year, 8 games where he had double-digit routes, but one or fewer receptions. So he really didn't do much in his rookie season. Still will be turning 23 in a little over a month. So there's definitely plenty of time for him to develop in his career. But I think this probably gives Parker a chance to see his ADP rise, while I expect Thornton's to fall back down a little bit. Parker, I think, is a good example of someone who I'd probably be more comfortable with in best ball leagues than I would in redraft leagues. He's been someone that throughout his career hasn't been great at separation, but great at getting a bunch of contested catches since he doesn't have that separation. Second most contested catches over the past 4 seasons. Last year had the highest average depth of target for any wide receiver with at least 40 routes. So he's been kind of a big player for the Patriots. One game with 156 yards, 4 games where he was between 60 and 80 yards, and then another 4 games where he played at least 75% of the snaps, but only gained 25 yards or less. So he had those big games. He had some quiet games. So that's kind of the best situation for a best ball player at the end of the draft. But in redraft, it makes it really hard to predict when he'll have those big games. And he's definitely not a high volume player at this point in his career where he's being used as more of a deep threat in the offense. So I wouldn't expect him to get to a point this season where he's consistently being a fantasy starter. So he's someone where I expect his stats to be decent, but where I would rank him is even lower in redraft, the opposite in best ball. So Parker, probably someone that I'm avoiding, as well as Thornton in redraft leagues, but best ball is the different story.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. It's the Patriots, the headache of trying to figure out who to start each week amongst that wide receiver group is probably going to be consistent unless we start to see something, emerge, like a trend emerge regularly early in the year. I could see these guys potentially being like waiver targets or something like that. But you're right. In lineup leagues, it's harder to kind of draft these guys and to use them in trustworthy spots for your lineup. So yeah, I think best ball makes a lot more sense for these guys. Tyquan Thornton, I get the excitement from him being a second round pick as well, but it's going to be a little bit up and down from basically based on what we've seen in recent years from them. I think Juju Smith-Schuster probably going to be the most reliable option there, at least among the wide receivers. And then we talked about Mike Gesicki, who we kind of liked last week, but we'll see what happens there as well. But let's move on to the Giants wide receiver situation. So kind of at least a bit of an interesting and ambiguous receiver room heading into training camp here. And one of the rooms probably worth keeping an eye or ear on as this offseason progresses to see if we can get a clearer picture of who might emerge, because the first significant word at a Giants camp so far comes from Dan Duggan of The Athletic, who reported on June 16th that Paris Campbell was the favorite target in OTAs, taking that slot role. There was also mention of rookie Jalen Hyatt, who was playing with the third team, and Doug had mentioned that Hyatt could have a role maybe as like a deep threat specialist as a rookie, but it looks like an uphill climb to unseat established veterans for a more substantial role early in the season. He also did report that Sterling Shepard is right on schedule from his ACL injury to be ready for the start of the season, but no mention of that on Wan'Dale Robinson, who's starting to feel like a pup candidate to start the year. But basically, the reports from Dan Duggan of The Athletic have led to a Paris Campbell rise in ADP. So he is up 34 spots, going from wide receiver 92 to wide receiver 78. Jalen Hyatt actually was one of the biggest fallers, or was the biggest faller overall. He's down 40 spots from wide receiver 65 to wide receiver 79. And then Wan'Dale Robinson, the third biggest faller at wide receiver, down 21 spots, going from wide receiver 75 to wide receiver 82. And most of that, again, coming from Duggan's article. Nate, Is there someone from this Giants receiving core outside of Darren Waller that you're drafting maybe more than others now that they're all kind of essentially in the same range as one another, or is this a group that you're avoiding altogether?
It's kind of easy to avoid them just because they have 8 different players that could potentially see a significant role in the offense. We're waiting for when Shepard and Robinson will come back. They also added Jeff Smith and Jamison Crowder for cheap contracts, so that either of them could have a role. But Isaiah Hodgins is probably the guy on the outside who I'm most confident will have a starting role in the offense. So fine taking a late round shot on him, but I think Campbell, if he can establish himself as a slot receiver over Shepard when he's healthy and Robinson when he's healthy, that slot role is a very important one for fantasy purposes. Going back to the Buffalo Bills days, Cole Beasley had some excellent seasons as their slot receiver. And even last year, Richie James, once he kind of established himself as the clear slot guy, once Robinson was injured midseason, he was the top 24 fantasy receiver in 5 of the last 7 weeks. The top 5 slot receivers in those 7 weeks in terms of receptions: Chris Godwin, Keenan Allen, CeeDee Lamb, Richie James, and Amon-Ra St. Brown. So Campbell really hasn't impressed all that much in his 4 years in Indianapolis. Will be 26, and that's typically not the age where you see wide receivers break out. Typically, it's a little bit earlier than that, than they start to break out. But we also weren't expecting much out of Richie James last year, and he became a fantasy asset down the stretch. So I could see this being a situation where Campbell has that kind of upside to be a fantasy starter if he can keep the slot role, just simply because of the volume that Giants slot receivers will get and slot receivers in the past have gotten in this offense. So I think Campbell is kind of the perfect late round draft pick from that perspective, in that, yeah, there's a lot of paths where he might not do much this season, but there is also a clear path where he can be a consistent fantasy starter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and if they like him and they're utilizing him, I mean, we saw, what at least during his time at Ohio State, right? He was kind of used as this after the catch type receiver. And you look at Daniel Jones, who he had, I think, the lowest ADOT last year of quarterbacks, at least, that had a certain amount of starts. So it was like a 6.5-yard ADOT. So he could be looking for him underneath quite a bit. And I would be feeling okay about him as a potential guy to emerge as kind of a sleeper or a late round flyer, and potentially a best ball target as well. But yeah, it does make me a little bit more concerned about like a guy like a Jalen Hyatt, for example, who I know people were excited about coming out of the draft, but being that deep play specialist, it wasn't a big part of the Giants game last season. So we'll see how much that actually changes this year, if at all. But yeah, it's good points. I think Paris Campbell does become slightly more interesting here if he is getting that work in camp, and the volume alone could potentially turn into something if he can, be that after the catch threat that he was when he was drafted. So all right, let's get one more ad in here. This one is from our friends at Manscaped. If you haven't heard already, it's Smooth Sack Summer. When you're playing in the sun, make sure you're scaped from pubes to bum. That's right. This is the summer to keep your balls cool while still looking hot with Manscaped. The leaders in below the waist grooming are making sure we all have a ball this summer by giving our pants partners everything they need to stay fresh. Dive headfirst into the Smooth Sack Summer by going to manscaped.com for 20% off plus free shipping with our code PFF. The Manscaped Performance Package 4.0 has everything you need to prepare that summer bod. They have built the ultimate grooming bundle for your summer grooming. Their Lawnmower 4.0 trimmer features a cutting-edge ceramic blade to reduce grooming accidents thanks to their advanced skin-safe technology. The Lawnmower 4.0 has a 7,000 RPM motor and new multi-function on-off switch, can engage a travel lock, and gives you the ability to turn the 4000K LED spotlight on and off when needed for a more precise shave. Did I mention this trimmer is waterproof too? Beach, lake, or shower, this razor will devour even the strongest pubes. Manscaped even threw in 2 free gifts to their Performance Package 4.0, the Manscaped Boxers and Shed Travel Bag. Get 20% off plus free shipping with the code PFF at manscaped.com. That's 20% off plus free shipping with the code PFF at manscaped.com. It's smooth sack summer, boys. Get on board or get left behind. All right. Let's go and turn our attention to the Arizona Cardinals and the fallout of the DeAndre Hopkins release. The Cardinals offense has just continued to sink this offseason with Kyler Murray unlikely to be ready for the start of the season. Obviously, DeAndre Hopkins cut, AJ Green retired, Robbie Anderson left for Miami in free agency. We now have Rondale Moore as the second biggest ADP riser at wide receiver, going up 27 spots from wide receiver 72 to wide receiver 60, which has largely coincided with DeAndre Hopkins getting released. Not really a surprise that the remaining members of the Cardinals offense would see their stock increase, but with this offense unlikely to be great in 2023, is it enough to kind of pique your interest in a Rondale Moore as a late round flyer type, or maybe a rookie Michael Wilson, or is it Hollywood Brown or bust for you in Arizona this season, Nate?
Michael Wilson, at least for me, has been kind of emerging as a late sleeper that I'd definitely consider, just with the top receivers that Arizona has, all fairly short for wide receivers, all 5'9" or shorter, where Wilson's the exception to that. And he's been getting a bit of praise recently. Coach Gannon said on Thursday that Michael has come in as a rookie. We said, hey, man, this is what we're expecting from you. Here's a role. And he's taken to it. He's doing a really good job, especially for a rookie. So that after OTAs, I think is a promising sign. And with how few wide receivers that Arizona has, I think he definitely has a chance to be a starter on the outside this year. The bottom line that we had for him in our draft guide, plug and play route runner who can fill any role asked of him at the next level. So I definitely think he can be a starter and have a significant role in Arizona's offense. I think with Marquise Brown, looking at his stats over the past couple of seasons, he's been incredibly consistent in terms of PFF grade. He's consistently been around 69 to 71. So I don't see him getting all that much better than what we've seen so far. And a lot of his stats that have looked good, a lot of them have been pretty volume based. He's been running more routes than anyone whenever he's been healthy, 9.6 targets per game over the past 2 seasons, which is top 10. But I think a lot of that's just simply how many plays Arizona was running on offense. So I could see that potentially going down. A lot of it's kind of unknown. I think Arizona's probably the one offense that we might know the least about what their plans are doing in general with the offense, with how inexperienced their offensive coordinator is. So I think that'll definitely be interesting. And then Rondale Moore, I think he definitely deserves to have that ADP rise. I think wide receiver 60 is probably a fine spot for him. He's been one of the better receivers at avoiding tackles after the catch, even though he hasn't been getting a ton of opportunities. So I think as long as he's on the field, I think he should see a decent number of targets, which should lead to a good amount of volume for him. I think probably the biggest concern that I've had for Moore is Greg Dortch, who also played slot receiver last year, looked fairly good in that situation. There were times where Moore had to play on the outside with Dortch in the slot, but this is a different coaching staff. And there was an article this past week on the Arizona Cardinals website kind of breaking down the positions. And at wide receiver, there were 4 locks for the team: Brown, Moore, Wilson, and then Zach Pascal, who's a free agent wide receiver from Philadelphia this past year, who's also on the taller side. So I could see him having a role where Dorsch was leading the list of receivers that were like, they have more to prove. So considering that had him fifth on the depth chart, basically, I'm a little bit more confident of Moore being the guy in the slot, unless they decide to put Brown in the slot. So I think that's probably the biggest concern, but I think at wide receiver 60, you can live with that risk of them maybe not seeing as much playing time, but I think he has the talent.
Yeah, it's a low cost for sure. Definitely worth taking a shot on at that point. And I definitely don't mind Michael Wilson. He's been somebody that I've picked up in rookie drafts quite a bit as well. For dynasty purposes, if he could already get the volume in year 1, that could be nice for him long term as well. And the other thing coming out of Arizona was the recent speculation that Zach Ertz could be cut this offseason at some point as well. So not doing a ton for helping Clayton Tune as far as receiving weapons go, or at least maybe potentially Clayton Tune. But we'll get into that another time. But Trey McBride already has a kind of higher ADP than Zach Ertz, who may not even be healthy to start the year with that week 10 ACL tear as well. But at 20 tight end 27 right now, I'd imagine we see that potentially increase even more if Ertz is released. That is for Trey McBride. So, McBride finished as a top 24 tight end in 5 of the 7 weeks where he was tight end 1 for the Cardinals last season. Wasn't exactly like an elite target earner at the position. Even when Ertz went down, I think he was 5th on the team in target rate at 15.4%. So might not be a high end tight end 2 in that offense for fantasy, but could be reliable in the way that Ertz was for those looking for kind of like that safe plug and play option at the position. Any interest in Trey McBride there, or thoughts on Zach Ertz?
A little bit on McBride. It's another situation where Arizona was just passing so much that Ertz was basically the leader in routes run per game while he was healthy last season. So I think I would expect those routes to go down a little bit for Arizona tight ends. And McBride was someone last year where he didn't really do much initially, slowly but surely got better as the season went on. So it's just how much of a leap he can make in year 2. So I'm ideally in a spot where I don't need to worry too much about a backup tight end, since ideally I'm drafting one of those top 8 players and then don't have to worry about a backup. But if I am stuck looking for a late round sleeper, I think he's a fine player to consider in that spot.
Yeah, like that. All right, let's close things out in San Francisco, where the quarterback situation could potentially be clearing up. Per NFL Network's Tom Pelissero on Monday, June 26th, the 49ers quarterback Brock Purdy was headed to Jacksonville to throw for the next couple weeks with quarterback coach Will Hewlett and ortho specialist Tom Gormley. So this could be another sign that Purdy is progressing through his rehab following the elbow surgery, and he does remain on track to be ready for the 2023 season. You also got Sports Illustrated's Albert Breer recently telling Colin Cowherd that I think if Brock Purdy were unable to take the first snap of training camp, which is a possibility, he's on track to play week 1, but they're still building the strength in his arm back up. I think Sam Darnold might take the first snap of training camp. Now, it doesn't mean Trey Lance can't come back and work his way forward, but I think they feel like they've already given this guy a lot of chances. So interesting there. This has led obviously to Brock Purdy, who's been by far the highest riser at quarterback, up 19 picks going from QB 27 to QB 25 this month. Trey Lance has been the biggest faller, down 25 picks, going from QB 25 to QB 30. This has been the case every week. So it's either Purdy has been the biggest riser or Lance the biggest faller, or both. So pretty wild situation when you consider the investment in Lance in the 2021 draft. But, as we get closer to the season, it does seem more likely that Purdy could be ready for week 1, which is really bad news for Trey Lance. It just does not seem to be working out in San Francisco. After trading 3 first-round picks for the chance to draft him, he could now potentially be riding the pine behind even Sam Darnold if Purdy can't go week 1. We'll see what happens in training camp, but I mean, the train is quickly reaching the end of the line, it feels like, already for Lance. And I think I might just be hopping off very soon as well. Maybe, still a decent last round flyer in best ball just because of that rushing upside. But I'm not even sure if it's worth it at this point. If he's going to be QB3 on the depth chart, maybe they could trade him. Who knows? But after being optimistic about him not that long ago in our quarterbacks rankings episode, that optimism is quickly turning into pessimism for me with the early word out of camp. How about you? How are you feeling about Trey Lance and the 49ers situation?
Yeah, I think it's mostly with Purdy. He's been moving up a little bit, and with this optimistic news, I think he should probably continue to be raising up rising up people's rankings. Finished at quarterback 17, 8, 15, 13, 11, and 5 in his starts last year. So those were all fairly consistently good. No real bad games in there, and a couple fairly good ones. Second in passing touchdowns per start, third best in scramble touchdowns per start, and top 5 in fantasy points on dropbacks and attempts. So was very good in terms of fantasy purposes when he had the opportunities. They have so much talent in that offense that you kind of expect anyone to be there to be a fantasy starter. It was just kind of the not many big plays in the past game that led to Jimmy Garoppolo and other quarterbacks not being as high. But with Purdy, he stood out 3.6 passes above 20 yards per start, which was third most for quarterbacks last year. So I think with Purdy, they can make more big plays and make that 49ers quarterback more fantasy relevant. And then looking at Lance, who's been on the downfall, I probably am not drafting him. I'm still probably holding on to him in Dynasty if I have him, unless someone wants to take him off my hands. The second that he's back into a starting lineup, I'll be back in on him, since he had, I believe it was 15 carries in one of his few starts. And there are very few quarterbacks who will ever get close to 15 carries in a game. And we know how much rushing upside helps in fantasy football. We saw Taysom Hill, when he was a starting quarterback in the NFL, consistently be a fantasy starter, despite his setbacks in the passing game. So I think any quarterback who can rush that much is definitely a fantasy asset, but if he's not going to see the field, then I'm not going to be drafting him in redraft. Probably not going to be going out of my way to draft him in Dynasty. But the second that he's in the starting lineup, he'll be at the top or near the top of any waiver wire article I write.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. It's so hard to trust him at this point now with all these reports coming out of San Francisco that they don't even want to use him as a starter. The writing is kind of on the wall there. I don't think he'll be long for that team. It seems like maybe he does get traded. Maybe things don't work out with another former Niners quarterback, Jimmy Garoppolo, in Las Vegas. There were concerns with his, physical and stuff like that. Maybe Trey Lance could potentially get traded to the Raiders. I don't know what he would fetch in a trade for San Francisco. That could probably be the biggest barrier. But yeah, that's the thing. If he's starting, we love the upside, but otherwise it's not really seemingly worth it to even target him on the 49ers at this point. So that's our look at some of the kind of biggest risers and fallers of the past month or so, and some of the relevant NFL news as well. So I hope you guys all took some actionable information out of that, and hopefully as we get closer to draft season, we'll continue to do that and get you guys ready for the 2023 NFL fantasy season. Very excited as we get closer here, but let's wrap things up as we have the past couple weeks with another one of our 5-round drafts. So we started with the strongest superheroes. We then followed that up last week with an all-time NBA starting 5. Nathan, unfortunately, you are so far 0-2. We may have to, things may change here because we're moving to another random topic. We're going with the best animated movies of all time. So this is tough. I thought this was a really tough topic because, man, there's a ton, especially you look at just like Disney and Pixar and things like that. There's a lot of options to choose from. As somebody with kids, I've watched way too many of those Disney and Pixar movies, so I had a hard time actually, saying that I like the movies anymore because they've been ruined for me watching them so many times. But since I won last week, the NBA team, it was a lot closer than the superhero one. So that was, and we got a lot more votes. So maybe I shouldn't have won. It was debatable. I think I thought I wasn't going to win that, but nonetheless, I got the win. And Nate, now you get the first pick again in our draft here.
Yeah, after picking Michael Jordan last time, I should have been able to draft some Looney Tunes after that and still ended up winning, but I guess that didn't happen. With the animated movies, we do our research with this like we do the rest of the podcast. And while I was doing my research, there really didn't seem to be a consensus number one. Eventually found some kind of consensus, but I think with the first pick, I will keep it fairly safe and go with The Lion King as my first pick. A classic at this point. Going with the animated version of it, not the more CGI version of it, but just a classic movie that I think is pretty widely loved, and I think a pretty good choice for the best Disney movie, at least of the past 30, 40 years.
Yeah, no, it's a good choice for sure. That was one of my potential ones. Again, one that we've watched a few times here, so I had a hard time falling in love with it. But I'm gonna go with Into the Spider-Verse. This counts as an animated movie, right? It's purely
Yep.
animated. Yeah, Miles Morales, Spider-Man. Going away from the Disney a little bit here. These were the kind of movies that actually I like to watch as well. So into the Spider-Verse for my money, a near perfect movie. So I will go with that for my first pick.
Fair. I had that up high, but the thing for me is I didn't know if I wanted it into the Spider-Verse higher or across the Spider-Verse higher. Definitely a lot of people loved Across the Spider-Verse too, so I'm going to go with that as my second pick since I knew if I went with one of those first, you would probably get the other one. So I would just let you decide which one you like better, and I will get the other one and be perfectly happy to get Across the Spider-Verse as my second pick.
Nice. I see you're just kind of rubbing it in my face that I haven't seen the movie yet. I was supposed to go yesterday, actually, funny enough, and
Ooh,
it didn't work out. So I would have felt bad choosing it when not actually having seen it. I would have had to lie or
yeah.
something. But I might go tonight. That's the plan. So I'm very excited. So great pick. Obviously, I'm going to assume that the movie is great as well. Um, okay, so for my second pick. You know what? I think I'll go with Shrek. The first Shrek. I know there's like four or five of them or something like that now, but I think the original Shrek still stands up. We've watched that a couple times, not a ton, but it's actually still pretty funny. Eddie Murphy is really great in it. Mike Myers. So Shrek number two for me.
I did have Shrek on my list of one that I would consider later. I agree that's a great movie. Some of the sequels I don't think hold up quite as well, but
Right.
definitely remember enjoying Shrek. But with my third pick, I will go with Toy Story.
Nice.
Going with the classic Pixar there. A lot of the Toy Story movies were very good. We could potentially pick more of them as this draft goes on, but I think uh, the first one just stands out with how unique it was, and uh remember seeing it in theaters the first time and enjoying it. So going and doing as much research as I could for this, Toy Story was fairly consistently one of the top couple animated movies where I was looking. So happy to get Toy Story in the third round.
Nice. Yeah, that's a great pick. That's kind of like the original too, like as far as movies that kicked off that kind of like computer generated look.
Yep.
Yeah, so that's a good one. Yeah, my son loves Toy Story, so that was on my list as well. But um okay, so next one for me. What do I got? I got three left. Let's go with. I keep leaning towards superhero stuff, so I'm gonna go the Lego Batman movie with Will Arnett as Batman and Zach Galifianakis as the Joker, Michael Cera as Robin. Some really good references in there for people that love the Batman lore and just ends up being like a really good and funny movie. So I'm gonna go Lego Batman for three.
Okay. I think with my next one, I will go with Up. Um,
Uh,
More recent movie than some of the other animated movies, but feels a little bit of a classic at this point as well. It was just a great story in itself, one that some of these movies watched younger in my life. This one was more middle of my life so far, and at a time where I wasn't watching a ton of animated movies, but definitely enjoyed seeing it and think it stands the test of time now that it's been out for 14 years at this point. So I think the story itself stands out. The animation's also great in this one, but happy to
yeah.
have Up with my fourth round pick.
Yeah. It also stands out as like one of the most devastating opening scenes of
Mm,
of these the kids movies of all time. It's just I think I watched it once and like I was like I can't watch this again just because of that opening scene. It's pretty much a one of the biggest downers you could watch. It's very hard hitting, but for anybody that's seen it. But yeah, Up is a good choice. It was a good movie. Um okay, so I guess my next one I'll go with The Incredibles.
okay.
The first one. This one was this is our second Incredible reference in
Yeah.
our draft already because you had Mr. Incredible on your strongest superhero team. I mean the first Incredibles is still really good. I think that deserves to be a top five pick for sure.
Okay. Last pick, I have a couple of options left of who I'm considering here. One that I'd consider is Toy Story 3. I had them on my list in case you took Toy Story from me, but I don't think I want two Toy Stories on my list. So I think I'm gonna go with the Lego Movie as my fifth one. I had the Lego
Nice.
Movie and not the Batman one as my last option. So um another just really enjoyable movie. Everything is awesome, and I get everything is awesome with my fifth pick. It has a surprisingly good ending to the movie as well, a touching ending if you haven't seen it. So happy to have a fun, crazy movie with a happy, solid story ending and a more recent movie as well. Plus, it has The Lonely Island. So happy to have the Lego movie at the end.
Nice, good choice. Yeah, it's hard to argue. Will Ferrell is great in so many things. So, yeah, I did like that ending as well. Lego Movie, that's a good pick. Oh man, so what I got Spider-Verse, Shrek, Lego Batman, Incredibles. I'll go with with the South Park movie from like the 90s. I think it was bigger, longer, and uncut.
Yeah.
I think it's great. I mean, the musical numbers in this movie are just unreal. So and obviously, the Blame Canada song, I it holds a special place in my heart as a Canadian. So it's a great one. I love it. It still again holds up as one of the funniest pieces of South Park media that there is. So I'm going with South Park to close out my my 5 round draft here.
Yeah, with the air quality in the Midwest recently, Blame Canada has a new special meaning these past couple days here. So.
It does. Yeah, it's yeah, it's starting to trend again, obviously. But yeah, this is a good one. I think it's going to be close again. I mean, so
Yeah.
you went Lion King, Across the Spider-Verse, the original Toy Story, Up, and the Lego Movie. I went with Into the Spider-Verse, Shrek, the Lego Batman movie, The Incredibles, and South Park, bigger, longer, and uncut. So we'll throw out the poll again, and see how it goes. We'll see which ones people like. It's basically just the best collection of
Yeah.
animated movies, right? Which ones would you take with you if you had to just pick 5 to watch over and over again? So that'll do it. Again, thank you to everyone for listening. This was a lot of fun. Thanks to Nate, as always, for doing this with me. Season's getting closer. I'm excited to get more of these episodes out here shortly. Also, if you haven't done so already, please subscribe to the PFF Fantasy YouTube channel. We would greatly appreciate the support there. Also, the PFF Fantasy Discord is open to anyone and everyone who wants to talk fantasy. And I could see that thing really heating up as we get into the draft season and into the regular season as well. Nate, I know I'm off this week, but you are not. What do you have new up on PFF.com for the people?
Yep. So this week I started getting back into writing. So I'll have at least 5 articles a week, probably more most weeks between now and the start of the season. This week it was mostly a bunch of ranking updates, updated best ball rankings, dynasty, dynasty rookie, superflex dynasty, superflex dynasty rookie. So those have been my 5 this week. But next week I will have update to my overall PPR top 300, start getting into some position rankings where I will go in depth into each of the players within that position of why I have them where I do, and then start touching on sleepers at the end of the week.
Nice. Awesome. That's great. Good to see Nate's stuff getting filling up the website as well. Always good content there. As for me, like I said, I'm off this week, but I'll be continuing my breakout series once I get back next week, going with wide receivers, tight ends, and defensive backs for IDP purposes. So that should be fun as well. Again, thank you all for joining us. We will be back next week covering our favorite wide receiver and tight end sleepers for the 2023 season. That should be a lot of fun as well. So until then, peace out.